Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 4 at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Martinsville Speedway, one of my absolute favorite tracks on the NASCAR circuit and of course one of the oldest. Now for today's video I didn't spend any time worrying about Xfinity and Trucks because everything we're going to talk about with the Cup cars will easily transfer to the other two series and should work either identically or very close in those other series. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the big changes for the physics in NASCAR Heat 4 is the addition of tire wear. Now tire wear is going to have a huge effect on the setup that you're running, so it makes sense that we need to, before we get into setup discussion, talk a little bit about the options that I use while I'm testing for these setups. So we'll start off in the options menu under the gameplay tab, and then we're going to scroll down to tire wear and fuel consumption. Normally I do this on 2x. I don't like to go any higher because I do like long green flag runs, but I understand that some of you like to go all the way up to 4x. Player tire wear rate, I like more wear. I like maximum tire wear, so I generally test on more wear and less grip under the grip fall off. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with different settings such as less wear and more grip, then that's going to change the setup that you're going to want to use in the races. So keep that in mind as we're talking about setups. What I'll try to do in each video is let you know the particular settings because I don't go for maximum tire wear at every track, just where I feel that it is appropriate. And also keep in mind on the driving tab, there is a setting that you'll need to match up for the AI. So if you want maximum tire wear, then you need to have that on both the player car and the AI car. Or if you're going for less tire wear and more grip, then change that for the AI as well. Before we jump into the setup discussion itself, let's first talk a little bit about the track. Known as the paperclip, Martinsville features heavy braking and a lot of throttle control. If you're not smooth on the brakes, if you're not smooth getting back to the gas, then you're going to have a lot of trouble at Martinsville, especially over the long run when you're going to have your tires start to wear. Now, the setup I'm going to show you today is a race setup. I did not go for max single lap qualifying type speed, and the reason is you don't need a whole lot to beat the AI at this track. The goal time of 19.538 is easily reached and exceeded. So that really wasn't an issue. So I focused entirely on the race setup. And I tried to find a nice balance so that for those of you who run 4x maximum tire wear and fall off, you would have something to start with. And you'll probably want to tighten this up a little bit to save that right rear. And for those of you who do not use aggressive tire wear and fall off settings, it will also give you a good baseline to start from. And then you can adjust the looseness and tightness to fit your own driving style. So now let's head into the setup. Let's get started with the shock settings. And you notice on the front, I'm using 5.7 and then 3.5 on the rear. I wanted to make the front just a little bit more aggressive than the rear, but still very close to the 3.5 setting all the way around. The stiffer you make the front bump setting, so left bump and right bump in the front, the tighter the car will want to be under braking because you're putting more pressure on the front tires. And then in the rear of the car, I wanted it to be as soft as possible so that I could get maximum grip on corner exits. So keep that in mind. As always, you will certainly want to adjust each individual corner of the car if you want maximum speed, but for the purposes of our video, I went with a 5.7 and 3.5 setup, and it worked really well for me. Moving on to the weight settings, you notice that the front weight is at 50.0. That seems to work really good for me. If you find the car is unstable on corner entry, wants to spin out as you start to enter the corner, then maybe bump this number up a little bit to 50.5, maybe even 51 or higher, and just get a feel for how that affects the car. The wedge, I'm using 54%. I used a good bit lower than that, down to around 51%. That also worked just fine. But again, for what I'm going to post on the channel, I want to make it as stable as I possibly can, and 54% wedge will help control the rotation of the car, particularly under heavy braking as you're braking and turning into the corners. Moving on to the spring settings, 1,200 pounds on both the left front and the right front. The higher the number you use on the left front spring, the looser the car is going to be on corner entry. And keep in mind, you're going to be under heavy braking on corner entry, so I want the left front and right front springs to be pretty close here. And the more split I have in those, meaning the less left front and the more right front I have, the tighter the car will be under heavy braking. So keep that in mind as your adjustment. I wanted to make it as even as possible in the front of the car, and that's why I chose equal front springs. Moving on to the rear springs, 430 in the left rear, 450 in the right rear. If you're using more aggressive tire wear and fall off settings, then you might want to drop these down to maybe 30 to 50 pounds and see if that helps save that right rear tire. But this combination, only 20 pounds of rear spring split, that allows the car to rotate while also not getting it too loose on corner exit. If you're finding that the car is simply too tight and you've determined it is not your driving style, which is very easy to do, if you get too aggressive with the throttle on corner exit, then you will certainly make the car really tight or jump loose in a hurry. So if you're smooth with the throttle and you need some help with rotation on corner exit, then either reduce the left rear spring and or increase the right rear spring. So get more split between the left rear and right rear. That'll help the car rotate through the center and on corner exit. So keep that in mind as well. Moving on to the tire settings, the left sides are both at the minimum 10 pounds, right sides at 23 pounds each, and anywhere from maybe 22 to about 25 pounds on the right side seems to work just fine. If you need a little bit more grip on corner exit, maybe you're a little bit loose, then drop that right rear tire pressure by a half pound or maybe a full pound and see if that helps. Also, if you are too loose on corner entry, maybe increase that right front pressure a little bit to 24 or 25 and see how the car reacts to that. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, the camber settings that I'm using here are simply the maximum amount of camber that really seemed to work for me. I also tried using camber that was much lower than this, down around something around +3 on the left front, and even lower than that on the right front, down around -1.5, -2, somewhere in that range. That also worked just fine for me. So really, this is more of a feel thing. And a tire wear thing. Just adjust it based on what helps maximize the tire life over the course of a long run. Front sway bar at 1.315. That has become pretty standard for me in NASCAR Heat 4, and that's because it works for me at the different tracks. If you need the car to rotate better through the corner, rotate quicker, then drop this front sway bar by 1 click, maybe even 2 clicks, and see how the car reacts. It should definitely make the car much looser. On the other hand, if you are feeling that the car is just simply too loose overall, then try bumping this front sway bar setting up 1 to 2 clicks, and that will certainly help to tighten it up. Moving on to the track bar, 12 inches on the left, 11 inches on the right. So we're a little bit higher on the left side than the right side, and that is simply to help me get maximum grip on corner exit. If you find that you are too tight on corner exit, then simply bump this up a few clicks, try that out, and that will certainly help loosen the car on corner exit. On the other hand, if you are too loose on entry to the corner, then come over to the left side track bar and drop that a little bit and see if that helps with your entry. If you're just starting out with making some of these adjustments, go ahead and drop down about 1 inch at a time, and that will be a big enough change that you should notice the difference in the feel of the car, and that will give you an idea of just exactly how each one of these settings, from the springs to the shocks to the different miscellaneous settings, affect the car. Moving on to the brake bias. Here I like to generally use the minimum amount of brake bias in the front that I can get by with, but for whatever reason, 75% was about as low as I could get until I started to have issues with the left front and starting to get loose on corner entry. So I bumped the brake bias up a little bit and it seems to work really good at 75 to about 76 or 77. Just keep in mind that as you increase the brake bias number, that's putting more front brake in the car, and it's going to tighten the car up under heavy braking, which of course you're doing a lot at Martinsville. Dropping the brake bias will free the car up. It'll put more rear brake in the car and help the car to rotate under heavy braking. Grill tape, I spent almost no time even paying attention to this. All I really cared about is that I didn't overheat during the race. 45% did not overheat, so that worked perfectly fine, but I'm certainly not going to pretend that that's the most aggressive you can get with the tape. Wheel lock and steering offset are at basically defaults for me at this point, 10 degrees and 0.05. The steering offset here, the more camber you use in the front, the higher the number you can get by with on this offset. And the reason is because you're trying to offset the pull to the left that the car has because you're driving on an oval and the way that the other settings on the car work. So the higher number here will want to offset more of that pull to the left, but be careful about getting this number too high because you can actually introduce a pull to the right on the straightaways, which can be very disconcerting as you are used to turning to the left entirely. Gear settings, I did play around with first through fourth gear a little bit. They're not going to be all that useful, first, second, and third at this track, simply because you're using so much gear at this place. 5.29, you can get a little bit more aggressive than that, or you can drop this a click or two and adjust your RPMs. Just keep in mind that on the rear end ratio, the higher the number you use, the more RPMs you're going to turn, the more torque you're going to have coming off the corner, which means the car is going to be looser. On the other end, if you drop this down a click or two, then you're going to be turning fewer RPMs, and that's going to tighten the car up under acceleration. So that'll do it for today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, these very same concepts that we talk about for the Cup car will certainly work for the other two series of Xfinity and Trucks. And in fact, at a track like Martinsville, I use either identical or very close to identical setups across all three of the top series. So thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 4.